Welcome to the Future of Less Work, where we're exploring how work is changing one conversation at a time. I'm Nirit Cohen, and today's episode is about something that sits just beneath the surface of our AI conversations, the disconnect, a growing tension between the promise of AI and the reality of using it at work. Tools are rolling out fast, but are employees ready? My guest today is Rich Veldran, CEO of GoTo. You might recognize the name from its earlier chapters, Log Me In. Rich leads a fully remote global company helping organizations integrate AI into everyday workflows. But more importantly, he's sounding the alarm about the growing gap between what IT leaders think is happening and what employees actually experience. We'll talk about new research from GoTo and workplace intelligence, showing that most workers don't trust AI, don't know how to use it, and in many cases are applying it in ways they probably shouldn't. We'll explore what this gap means because clearly AI alone will not fix work, and the future will not belong to the companies that have the flashiest tools. It'll belong to those that make AI work for people. Rich, welcome to the Future of Less Work.
It's great to be here. Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
And thank you for joining me. I'm really curious, before we even get to the whole AI conversation, I want to start with your own leadership experience. You're a CEO of a fully remote company, and that's still unusual at the time where most leaders are still arguing between hybrid and fully office. You've doubled down on remote, and you're staying that way. Why is that?
Yeah, I would say culturally, it's to a degree in our heritage, right? So our company deals entirely in remote work solutions. So we're about $1 billion company. Everything we do services the remote work world. So in a sense, we're drinking our own champagne, if you will. But more importantly than that, it works. So I actually started here 5 years ago in the midst of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
On as the new CFO as the company was going private. I looked at that task and I had not come from a remote world, right? I was the traditional office world. For me, I had to take a look at it and say, how do you actually get things done when you haven't met anybody and you're a complete mobile situation?
Remote, yeah. How? So
Yeah.
how?
Well, the amazing thing was I found it ultimately to be easier because it just comes down to the same things you do when you're in the office. It's basic communication, like spending time with people, actually listening to people. And it ended up, I had more time to do that because I wasn't commuting. I wasn't traveling as much all over the place. So I could spend a lot more time with people, hearing what's on their minds, hearing what was in their heads, figuring out what made sense in terms of engaging them. And once you get into a rhythm of that, it can work very, very well. And for us, it's been terrific.
So this whole argument about the culture needing the office, the sporadic, interactions in the corridors, the things you don't plan.
Mhm.
How does that work?
Yeah. And look, everything, and we are a hybrid organization, right? So we are remote. I would say remote centric, but we have locations, we have headquarters. People do and can come in. So for us, it's that combination of things. We encourage people to have collaboration spaces. We encourage people. We set aside budget for groups to come together on a regular basis so that they can bounce around ideas. But most of the time, if they choose to work remotely, they can. So you have that optionality to work both ways, and I think for us at least, it's worked very, very well.
Yeah, I also, I heard you say this in the beginning, and I actually want to pause on that because I think it's super important. Your product, right? Your service, the thing you do is about remote, right?
Yes.
So how has working remotely or working dispersed, the way that you describe it, how's that made your product different, better than it was, for example,
Yeah.
pre-pandemic, when
Well,
it necessarily wasn't that way?
yeah. Well, see, that's the beauty. We are the test market for our own products, right? So we know what needs we have, and we can identify those needs and build that into the product. that we bring to market, and we're the first guys to test them because we're using them internally. That is tremendously helpful, and I think it's spurred a lot of innovation at the company. Um, if I think about our forays into AI, we've been heavily investing in that arena because we realized that we could get a lot more work done in a lot more efficient way if we adopted AI tools that don't replace the human interaction, they augment it. So it's worked quite well for us.
Okay. All right. So let's circle back to AI. So you have this new research with workplace intelligence that shows this disconnect. I think I saw numbers almost 90% of the leaders think employees understand AI and about 80% of the employees say they don't, right? Which is not just a gap. It's like a completely different reality inside the same organization. I'm curious, why'd you set out to even ask these questions? Did you think did something indicate that that's what you were going to find?
Yeah, it's interesting. More of it was we wanted to get a real view of what's going on in the landscape. You hear a lot, right? There's all sorts of news flow every minute of every day around AI, and it's obviously a critically important part of where the world is heading, and everybody's investing in it. So we wanted to just kind of cut through the noise and say, what are we hearing on the ground level? What can we learn about where things are working well, where they need improvement, what some of the barriers are to adoption. And for us, what we found is that most people actually do use it in the workplace, right? So most respondents said they actually use AI, which is interesting. And
Yeah,
in
you're
fact,
also specifically talking about tech savvy people,
yeah,
right? By
it's really
design.
people. So what we did is about half of the people in the survey were IT, and then the other half were other workers as well. So there was a combination,
So
but
work is in organizations that are tech kind
yeah.
of, yeah, okay.
But what we found is people use it, but that it's a simple question: are you using AI? And almost 80% of respondents said yes, I use it. But then when you ask the next question is, well, is it overhyped? Are you getting from it what you believe you should get from everything you hear? That's where the interesting piece comes in because they'll say, hey, I am more productive, so that's good. But
Okay.
the reality is I'm not seeing a game changer. So I hear the world telling me it's going to be a game changer. That I'm not seeing. So and then when we probe deeper into that, what they tell us is they're not expert in it. They don't. They have tools, but they're not on their roles. They haven't been properly trained, so they can get something out of it, but not enough. So the IT leaders, on the other hand,
Okay, so it's
use
not an overestimate it's not an overestimation by leadership and it's not an underestimation by the or people. It's um it's what is it? We threw them
it.
in the pool and expected them to swim?
Yeah, I think it's a maturation phase. So IT leaders say, hey, we have access to certain tools, say ChatGPT. People are using it. So people get it because, if I'm an IT leader, I may intuitively get it more than most other people will. So you would believe, hey, if they're using it and they're more productive, we've done the work, right? But when you go a deeper level, people say, yeah, I'm using it, but I don't use it to its full extent. And I know there are more capabilities that AI can deliver, but I don't know how to get to them. And the solutions haven't been customized for my role. I haven't been trained specifically in my role. And in fact, 50% of respondents tell us that their companies don't have policies that govern AI. So it's a little bit of Wild West. But what needs to happen then is, the indicated actions are you need training. You need to find the right tools and deploy those tools. You need the right policies in place. And I think that's where you're going to see the divide. The people who do that well roll out the right tools, train their workforce, have policies in place that make sense. They're going to be the ones that thrive.
So let's talk about that. So you're CEO of your own company and you're using that as a training ground by design, right? What did you circle back and do differently because of this understanding?
Yeah. So actually, what we ended up doing is we rolled out a company specific tool that so rather than just pick a tool and go out there and do it, we have a somewhat custom designed internal tool that people can use. It has all the power. It's powered by the engines you would expect it to be powered by, but it can be customized to the work that you do. So we have a application for HR. We have one in finance. Obviously, the technology team uses it, and then we have policies in place where people know what can I do, what can't I do, which kinds of work would make sense for me, what should I avoid. But
So,
what
so here's the question I have for you, because I'm thinking about the practicality of this, right? Part of the issue these days is that the capabilities and the tools they're rolling out really quickly. And the old model where we, the organization, had a process, usually owned by IT, right? Selected a tool, brought it into the organization, fit it into the other spaghetti things we have in the organization, trained the people. That process is not feasible in a world where by the time you've finished that, 15 new versions of 15 different tools that didn't exist show up, right? So how do you do what you're describing given the speed of change?
Well, look, it's staying on top of things. So as the engines evolve, you obviously upgrade the product. So you have to stay current, right? You have to stay current on training as well, and that's what we spend our time doing on a yeah, I would say with our own team. If I think about how we then deploy that in products that we're building to bring to the market, we've built more custom solutions for verticals. So just one example is in the automotive space. Um, Auto dealers have a very different need than other industries. So we've built our product for the cloud telephony and contact center space, which is powered by an AI receptionist. But we've built that very custom that it can be used in any automotive industry. So to me, if you roll out a generic tool for everybody, you'll get a lot of value. But if you can actually figure out what are the differences in needs for your end customer, or whether your end employee, if they're in a certain function, if you can do that level of customization, but it needs to be quick customization. You need to be able to change it quickly.
Yeah, I think that's the issue. It needs to be quick, and so you need to be really quick to roll out the updates and
Yeah,
the things
in
that are rolling in.
a,
And they need to be quick to learn how to use the new things, which is not trivial.
Yeah. So, building as much of a simplicity motion into things is the key. Getting complexity out of it. It's a lot easier in today's cloud-based world. You can update things pretty quickly, right? In
Yeah. Yeah, from a technical rollout perspective, but from a people perspective, it's another one of those things that was really interesting in your report that more than half of the employees said they used AI for things that I think you guys defined as either sensitive or high stakes. So
yeah.
can you share a little bit more about what that is that you saw and you said, "Wow, that's not a good idea."
Yeah, see, and that's to me one of the interesting things. It screams for the need for policies and guidelines, which because people don't know what to do. So if you can get it and try and do some routine task, or you could try to do something where you're making personnel decisions, or there are legal implications,
Okay.
or you're putting sensitive information in, personal identifiable information, those kinds of things. That's what we saw. People are doing that because they don't know not to do that. They may not realize that if you put something into the tool, it stays in the tool. So there are so that again, it just comes down to policies and guidelines. But the problem is most companies don't have them, or less than 50%.
What would you, so from your experience, because again, I think policy and I think guidelines, and I'm sorry, I wear my HR hat, so I say this with love, right? But that's the bureaucracy of the organization. And sometimes it's those things that are preventing you from actually adopting the leading edge tools and, and allowing the things that need to happen that are different than the way they used to be, because policies and guidelines take years or take longer. They take longer to design than they take longer to redesign. So if you're looking at this and you say, okay, I need the absolute minimum in terms of policy and guideline that put the guardrails in that, yes, you know when you need to start asking because you're crossing, a threshold. What would those be?
Yeah. Well, and I'll say one thing first on that. You can view something as a rule, which is perhaps perceived as a negative, or you can view it as a coaching device where, hey, if I'm in the Wild West trying to figure out how to do this, if I had some guidance, that would be helpful. And that's how I would view a policy in this, or a guideline, as opposed to, take out the ruler and put the rule down, right? So given that, a lot of it just comes down to the types of and look, there'll always be some discretion in what you're going to choose to do with it, but things that putting sensitive, employee specific information, I would tend to avoid doing those kinds of things. So you would put that in a policy. Don't do those kinds of things. If it involves a legal decision that's specific to the company or to somebody within the company, avoid that. So there are some things that will feel basic and they're not onerous, but it'll help people to at least get a better lay of the land than if they're completely left in the wilderness.
Yeah, and which by the way, none of what you said is almost like company specific. I think these are at some point these have to be like it's the alphabet, right? It's teach me to read or teach me to type. It's the lay of the keyboard, right? You have to teach people what works and how it works, and then they should know what they should and shouldn't do. It's kind of like driving rules, on the road.
Yeah. No, I think that's it. That is honestly right. But again, it's new terrain for a lot of people,
Yes,
right?
yes. Good
So
point.
yeah.
Actually, that's a really good point. I've never thought about it this way, but um, that's almost like a flag that we need to think about that's broader than an individual company, and it would help if that were I mean, take it all the way up to governments. I know, like European Union, they're trying to put these guidelines in place that, depending on the type of content, you take Japan, they're doing something completely different with absolutely, all enabler kind of content. So, really interesting. Okay, so you say there needs to be, because I had this question. I was going to ask you if this is a policy or a training issue, and I'm not sure I have an answer for that. I mean, you're calling it putting the policy, but I'm thinking we
It
should get people trained.
It
Yeah,
is, and in
yeah,
fact, we asked questions on policy versus training, and in both arenas, respondents said there's not enough. Right? We either don't have policies. As I said, fewer than 50% of the respondents said their companies had them. But in terms of the right training, over 80% said we haven't had the right training yet. And the right training could be defined as guidelines, could also define of, how do you use it in the work that you do, right? So you can use, like, a person can say, I'm going to use Chat GPT for something, but the way you might want to use that is going to be different potentially based on the function that you're in, right? Whether you're writing code or whether you're
yeah.
uh, trying to audit something, whatever those things might be, there are different uses and use cases that we can train people on. But
Yeah, I agree, and I wonder whether we've been focusing maybe too much on AI as a productivity tool rather than, um, I don't know, a tool that that requires the guidance, the ethics, the context to
yeah,
work properly.
yeah. No, I think that's what I mean, and it's funny. Not to go off track on it, but if you think about the world of work and jobs that will exist, right? Yes, there will be certain types of jobs that will go away, right? But then there are other jobs that will be created. Think of like an AI ethicist. You would never have imagined that in a million years, but you're going to need people who specialize in those kinds of things. Maybe not at every company, but certainly in the world at large.
Yeah, but I have actually been thinking about what thinking means. So, or what writing means, right? Because we used to focus on certain aspects of creative thinking or analytical thinking, and tools can do the analytical thinking. So, what is it that we need to do? And I'm thinking about the iterations and actually a lot of it is about the questioning the results and refining the question and thinking through maybe the things that you didn't ask that are implicit assumptions that are showing up in the results. So again, maybe it's really interesting because you're raising an interesting blurry space, a gray area between policy and training. So
Yeah.
maybe it's policy today because we don't have the training, and what we should be focusing on is training everyone so that we don't need the policy.
I think that's actually 100% right. You have to start somewhere. So before you can train everybody, you have to actually know the landscape that you want to play. Right. So think of that as policy, if you will, and then develop the training for that. That's where you're going to get the biggest impact.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So back to kind of using your own experience as a playground for all of this. What have you learned about how GoTo rolls out new tools in a way that actually lands with your customers, maybe, and doesn't miss that area of they're not trained and they don't know how to use it or they're misusing it?
Yeah, and a lot again. It starts with communication as the core. So, in building the product, what we will do is sit with our customers, right, and understand their needs. It's almost a design principle where you sit down and you say, how do you conduct your work? What are the things that you do? And then we look at their process and say, there's a savings opportunity there. Here's something you can cut out. Ooh, here's where you might be better served to spend more thought time if you could routinize some of the tasks with a tool, right? So then we'll take that back, we'll build that into our tool, bring it back to the customers, and they will test it. So for us, it's really there's that I can't overstate enough the importance of the human element in all of these things. This isn't good. The world's not going to be run by robots alone. The human element becomes even more important as you go through things. What is that user experience?
So you have a sense of how much of the job you're changing in the areas you're touching?
I think it'll continue to evolve. I would say we've taken out, if I think of say the AI receptionist, for example, right, which is a product that we have where call centers, rather than have to get a live person and have them figure out where to route the call and do all those things, it can do a lot of that. It can answer the basic questions. It can route the call to the right person. It builds a database of knowledge, those kinds of things. So that takes a lot of work out of the front end, right, of the system. But to me, that's just the start. There are other it'll get smarter and smarter, better and better, able to answer deeper, more complex questions
Yeah.
on its own.
So
But
if you're the person on the back end that gets the escalations or the second or third tier questions, right? You're going to eat into those jobs as well.
that's possible, but other opportunities become created. If you think about people who need to be expert in understanding the AI and dealing with the AI, or spending more time with customers to actually meet their needs. Most of the time, people can't get to the customer needs the way they'd like to because they're busy answering 1,000 phone calls and just doing all of the paperwork, right?
Yeah.
You could eliminate some of that. You can spend more time with the customer. The customer feels better. Your business does better.
Yeah, and I think that's a. I mean, I'm glad to hear you say this because we in this argument that seems to be going on about is AI going to, and I call this podcast the future of less work, right? Because there's a lot of potential less directions, and one of the versions is technology will take away our jobs, right? And we won't have anything to do. By the way, the other direction is technology will take away a lot of our job. Yay, we won't have to do all the things we don't like to do. And maybe we'll get around to doing the things that are either, valuable, we never go around to, we want to, or, we're passionate about. So I think this idea that the fact that a job is built the way it is and you're automating it doesn't mean there's no job. It just means you can go figure out what needs to get done that you never got around to
Yeah,
doing.
yeah. If I think of my service organization, for example, they're excellent, right? But they're busy. they're working all the time. And we have thousands and thousands of customers because we have a lot of SMBs, and they don't touch every customer because they can't. There's not enough time in the universe for them to be able to do that. So they touch the customers that they can, the larger ones, the people who call in and they have issues, whatever those things are. But if I can have a world where a lot of that busy work is taken out, a lot of the paperwork, the simple questions that they answer over and over that are just easy questions to answer that the AI can do, then they can turn their attention to not just servicing the customers they already deal with better, but touching a broader set of
Yeah,
accounts.
having a relationship, maybe identifying new areas of need, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So let's talk about those SMBs because you mentioned them. I saw in your data that SMBs, so you said only almost about 60% of employees in companies under 50 people are using AI. And many say they don't even know where to start, right? So is there a problem with SMBs? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think with SMBs, again, they tend to be, obviously they're smaller, so they tend to have less in the way of funds to spend on things like training, right? So larger organizations have that advantage that they can start to put these things in place and roll things out. SMBs very often are doing a lot of different things all at once. They're wearing many hats. It's harder to sit down and actually really get up to speed on the various tools. Spend time on training. Training may not even be offered because the company doesn't have the ability to do that yet. So the solution there is how can we provide things that are simpler for the SMBs to make use of? And again, if I not to keep talking
So
about
out of the box kind of solutions
out of
that
the box,
that
yeah,
yeah, and user friendly and yeah, simple to use. Yeah.
exactly. Which is what we try to build into our products. It's because we target primarily SMBs, so we try to bring something that bang out of the box. You got the magic. It's easy to implement, easy to deploy, easy to maintain, easy to understand. If you can do
Yeah.
that, you help people.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you know, I'm thinking about your perspective from a leader perspective, and we talked about the remote, right? The move to remote, the understanding of how to work, and now I think about how leadership is evolving in this world where AI does more of the work, but we still need the humans to build trust and drive culture and maybe make the ethical calls and other big calls. How do you prioritize what stays human versus what defaults to digital?
Yeah, it's actually a great question. And it's one that I spend actually quite a lot of time on. Again, and there's two things, right? There's the AI aspect of it. Then there's also for us the remote aspect, right? So what I do is you don't want people to feel like they're just cogs in a machine and there's tools doing things, right? Which could happen left to its own devices. So that level of ongoing communication and personal interaction becomes more important. And I'll do it in a multimodal way, right? So I will go out and spend time in person at each of our work. In fact, 2 weeks from now, I'm heading down to India to spend time with the team there. It'll be my second time this year that I'm spending time with that team. But that's an important investment of time to do that. At the same time, for instance, what I will do is every month I put down something called Rich Insights. Very clever, but and I'm rich, and I'll do it in different ways to have different kinds of forms. So sometimes it's a live podcast broadcast, sometimes it's a recorded broadcast, sometimes it's written. But you find different ways to interact on a regular basis, and then I have regular town halls that are live, and we take interactive questions.
Yeah. So here we are back to communication, human
Absolutely.
touch, and you also you give a real life example of something that I've already heard on the podcast, where in a world where people don't come in the office, managers need to go to where the people are,
Yeah,
which is another one of the things
absolutely.
you
We can
talk
do our
about.
part.
Yep.
But
Yep.
little things like that matter. And I will tell you, in my entire career, people used to always ask me, like, how do you lead people? I said, talk to them like they're human beings. That's what I've always said because it's
Grown-ups
true.
also.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's just like, come on, you're not a different species. So if you just actually spend time with people in a real way, with empathy, with understanding, it goes a long way. And by the way,
Yeah.
so it's not hard
Yeah,
to do.
I first of all, I agree with you, but I think I even agree with you more because when in this kind of digital space, you need the human, and I think we're underestimating the human aspects of work.
Yeah, absolutely. As I think about it, sort of that human centricity, along with AI, is going to win the day. So the people who actually get that and don't think that the world is a bunch of cogs in the machine, but it's people that we can make better through AI, and we can enhance their performance and enhance their experience. If we look at it as a thing that lifts people up, that's going to win the day.
Yep, absolutely agree. So I always wrap up because we're really good historically at giving answers. And I actually want to ask you for a question. What's the question you think we should all be asking these days about the future of work?
Yeah, that I think there are many questions. I would say, to me, one of the ones that I think about is, how do you sift through all of the noise? Because there's a lot going. I mean, there is everything coming at us every single day, right? How do you sift through the noise, stay true to what's truly important, and make sure that your organization lives that? Now, in many ways, it's the CEO's job to say, where's that North Star, and how do I sort through all this noise and figure out how I bring people along for the journey? Because you can lose people along on the way to the journey. And if you lose them because you're through inattention or through just relying on tools, you'll lose the game. So, to me, the question is, how do you sort through the noise, and how do you actually stay true to what matters? And what matters ultimately, quite frankly, is your people.
Okay, that is a good note to end with. So thank you, Rich,
Oh, thank you.
for joining me today. And for more about Rich and GoTo and the data we discussed, check out the links in the podcast description. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow The Future of Less Work wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, your best people do not work because they have to. They do not work because you tell them to or because you measure them on it. They work because they want to, because by working for you, they're achieving their own purpose in life. Till next time.